Ches Halacha Zayin, V'Rakach Mevor Bot, Hashem Alekeinu Melech Olam, Asher Gitshanu, Mitzvayz Tzivon Al Achilas HaZevach. So we see in the Peirush below here that we're going to be talking about Birchas HaZevach with Pesach. When do you make the bracha on the Korban Pesach, and when the Chagiga, when on the Korban on the Pesach itself. Im Peter Zuazu, is one bracha enough for both of them? What's the Nusach HaBracha? So the Rambam says after he's eaten the matzah mora, he makes the bracha Baruch Hashem, and I emphasize this, just remember that this is the most important part of the bracha. The Ken Melech HaOlam is the second most important. Tzivonu is the third most important. Al Hilchos Matzah, that's just to clarify what the bracha is about, and therefore the main emphasis should be at the beginning. And you should eat from the Bosach Chagiga first, because you're supposed to culminate the meal with eating from the Korban Pesach, and that's in order that the Pesach should be eaten satiated. And that's when he comes to the Pesach. So you see in the second bracha, and he eats from the physical aspect, physical Pesach. Now in Korban Pesach we find, and they brought in the Pesach at the beginning of the Seder, took it out and then warmed it back up again and brought it back in to eat later, unless they were eating it for the entire meal. If they only had a Pesach without the Chagiga, then it would start at the beginning. So he writes here that he eats Migufay Shel Pesach, and by the Chagiga he writes Bostoner Chagiga, because the Pesach they brought it for Shulchan Aruch. The Chagiga they brought up into pieces. In other words, the Korban Pesach was brought whole, and the Chagiga was broken up into pieces. And since you're bringing Shulchan Aruch, and with it more of the Yerek, Echod, Matzos, Roises, Gufo Shel Keves, HaPesach, or Bosach Chagiga, you bring the Bosach Chagiga, because that's like you break up before you bring it. V'loi Birchas HaPesach, Peirush HaZevach, the bracha of Pesach does not free you from making the bracha on the Korban, and the bracha on the Korban doesn't free you from making the bracha on the Pesach. Now, how would the Birchas HaPesach free the Zevach? Pesach is eaten at the end. So the question is, if you're eating first the Chagiga, obviously you have to make the bracha on the Chagiga first, because how you're eating how can you make the bracha on the Pesach? The Maggid Mishnah cites the Mishnah Sochem 121a. If you made a bracha on the Pesach, you don't have to make a bracha on the Zevach. On the Zevach, you did not fulfill your obligation for the Pesach. Rabbi Shmuel. Akiva says neither one is good for the other. So Rabbeinu Melech writes that the Mishnah, the Rambam passes like Rabbi Akiva, because the Halacha is like Rabbi Akiva mechaveroi, when it's only one person. Rabbi Shmuel was only one individual. Rabbeinu Melech asks a question. It's understood that the bracha shel zevach on the Chagiga, which is before the Pesach, doesn't part of the Pesach. And after you eat the Chagiga, when you eat the Pesach, he has to make a new bracha. But what's the hezbollah? The Birchas Pesach doesn't part of Shel Zevach. The Zevach is also Bosach Chagiga. He eats before the Pesach. So what does it mean? How does it work? And furthermore, after he eats the Pesach, you don't eat anything else. So what's he referring to? Where's the situation where he's gonna not make he's gonna have made a bracha already on the Pesach, and he hasn't eaten it yet? As we'll learn in Halacha Tes, that after the Pesach, you don't eat anything. That's what the Afrikaans basically represents, the final action. And there were tzaddikim who you could see the juice flowing from their mouth when they ate the Afrikaans. Because Min HaShamayim they gave him a Korban Pesach. So he explains, we're not talking a Mishnah that he ate the Pesach first, or that he made the brachas of Pesach first. And the question is, well, if it works for the Chagiga anyway, why shouldn't he use it for the Chagiga? And therefore, if he made the Birchas HaZevach al Pesach, he was not Yotzi Yedei Chavoso, because they're two separate things. And he brings a proof from this. There is at times no Chagiga at all. As we mentioned, when Chagiga is Chal on Shabbos, we pass in that you don't bring a Chagiga on Shabbos, if Erev Pesach is Chal b'Shabbos. Or if there's only a few people, and in order to end up eating the final piece of the Korban Pesach, satiated, you have to eat the whole Korban Pesach among the 2 or 3 people that are there, then you would start eating right away at the beginning of the meal, and it would be enough for them to have from the Pesach itself. And there's no korban that you could have at the night of Pesach, because if on the 13th you brought a shlomim, so at night of the 15th you would no longer be allowed to eat it. There's no korban that's eaten for more than 2 days and 1 night. The tzlach, right? I remember this says in 121 that Zman Beis Hamikdash, it could very well be that they started off the meal with a little bit of the Pesach, and then they ate the Chagiga, and they concluded the meal with a little piece of the Pesach. So then they would make the bracha of Pesach before the Chagiga, because they just wanted to start it off. There's no Issa to eat the Pesach when your stomach is empty. The obligation is to eat a kazayas when your stomach is full. How you get there can be either through eating the Pesach or the Chagiga, and therefore the Tzlach says so. He made the bracha at the beginning on the Korban Pesach, ate a little bit of it. Now he brought the Zevach, and now he has to make another bracha according to Rabbi Kiva. We'll turn the page. The Lecha Mishnah cites, the Gemara says that the din is, if he made a bracha on the Pesach, he fulfilled his obligation on the Zevach. It's totally a machlokes of Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva, as we learned. Why? In a separate aspect. It's brought about not because the carbonates are different, but because the actual spraying of the blood is done with zrika or shvicha. The Dam Pesach means shvicha. The Kohen stands next to the Mizbeach and he pours it. He doesn't splash it, but he pours it slowly against the wall of the Mizbeach, and the blood flows down and goes to the foundation of the Mizbeach. Dam Chagiga needs to have zrika, which is done from a distance, and I think zrika, I'm not sure, I'm quite sure he's talking about zrikas, but Klal Shvicha he's talking about on top also. And therefore, the din though is that if you spill blood, instead of spraying it, then you fulfill your obligation. But, fakir. Right. Aval ein shvicha b'klal zrika. If you did it with zrika, it's not called shvicha. And therefore, according to Rabbi Kiva, ein zrika b'klal shvicha, ein shvicha b'klal zrika. Neither of them is capable, is kosher either way. And since the action on the korban is different, that requires a different bracha for the korban, and therefore that's why they have this machlokes. That's why the Hilchos Chametz U'Matzah doesn't part to one, and the other one doesn't part to the other. So I'll just point out here that you can bring Ma'aseh Behema for the Chagiga, and Ma'aseh Behema is b'shvicha. So it should be, according to this, it should depend as to whether it was a Ma'aseh Behema or it wasn't. But the Lecha Mishnah says, how can the Rambam paskin like Rabbi Kiva that ein birchas haPesach koiteres hazevach, and vice versa? And Psudei Hamikdash paskins that anything that's done with zrika, they did with shvicha yiyotza. According to the Lecha Mishnah, if that's the main criteria, whether or not they're brought in the same fashion, then according to the Rambam, you can be yotza even if it was not Ma'aseh Behema, it's brought on top, since you would be pouring the blood at the base of the Mizbeach, it would be kosher, so you should be yoitza anyway. The Meiri also has this question, and he writes that this sugya is only telling us certain laws, and even though we pass on like Rabbi Kiva that a bracha does not, of one, does not absolve one from making a bracha on the other, that's not definitive. The halacha is that way. With regard to zricha b'klal shvicha, he also points out that it could be zricha b'klal shvicha. It might have to do with the animals themselves. One is kochim, And one is a special, unique kochim, which is called, in a sense, a korban tzibur, which is Pesach, and that's what the Chazon Ish writes. That the Rambam Paskins, the Ein Birchas HaPesach, Poidet HaZevach, is not because it's a different type of service as to whether you pour the blood or you spray the blood, but rather the Pesach and Zevach are two mitzvahs, and therefore one is not potter with the bracha of the other. The separate mitzvahs, Pesach has its own unique mitzvah. It's not part of kochim, the general rule of kochim. Now, Nusach HaBrocha, the Kesef Mishnah asks a question. And when the Rambam says you make a brocha al achilas hazevach, and Pesach you say al achilas haPesach. The Rambam himself writes, when he does a mitzvah for himself, he writes lasoi, so not al. And why does he say here that he makes a brocha of al if he's doing it himself? So the Chesed Dovid explains that the Rambam writes that he makes a brocha on a mitzvah after he did it, he makes a brocha al, like al bir chometz. Wait a minute, we'll change the page. Even though in Torah, in the minute that he decided to nullify it, he was mekayim the mitzvah, even before he was boidik. So it's in his heart, so how can he make the bracha? As soon as he says, I'm going to be mavatal, so he was mavatal. So why is he making the bracha afterwards? Therefore you make a bracha of al. So too by Achilas HaPesach HaYazevach, the mitzvah started by shlit, so you're actually going after the mitzvah has begun, and therefore you make a bracha according to the Rambam al, and not lechol, even though you're doing it yourself. And he brings as a proof. The Rambam writes on shlitas haPesach you make it lishchot, not al shlitas. You see, before you always say lishchot, not al, but why in Peirush HaMeir he writes you make a bracha lechol as hazevach, lechol as haPesach, and now he doesn't say like here in the Yad Chazokim al achilas, and we always say that the Yad Chazok is more correct than the Mishnayos, Peirush HaMeir, and therefore the Rambam may have changed his mind and decided that here, as we said before, because since we're not at the beginning of the mitzvah before it starts, therefore you say al. And we'll try to learn Peri Ches Halacha Ches. We don't have any other korban. We don't have any korban at all. Here we'll discuss Hilchos Chametz U'Matzah B'zman Hazeh, whether you dip it in charoises, that you shouldn't leave the mora in the charoises, kairach and tibul b'charoises. The Rambam says in the Peirush B'zman Hazeh today, Shein Korban Pesach, after you make the bracha Hamoitzi Lechem, you make a bracha al Hilchos Matzah right away. And you dip the matzah in the charoises and eat it. This is the shita that you need tibul and charoises gap also for matzah. The Magen Mishnah adds, according to the Rambam, you have to do in charoises also the kairach, and so the Rimi Ben Gaya said. Harayve disagrees. He doesn't explain why, but the Magen Mishnah cites that many are of the opinion that you shouldn't dip matzah in charoises at all, especially if you don't hold of if you hold the brooks, you wouldn't do it. And he adds still, he shouldn't have said zehevel. It's not simple. Avei Manoach is of the opinion that the Rambam says you dip the matzah in charoises is according to the Gemara that one is not permitted to eat until they bring along something for him to eat it with. And since he doesn't have lifton, only charoises, therefore he dips it there. What is the Gemara over there on Brochas? I don't recall at the moment. And the Rambam says, so we find from the Mishnah, they brought before him, he dips in a chazeres until he gets to the paperes hapas, which are the things that are eaten with the bread. After the tibul rishon of chazeres, he doesn't dip it until he gets to paperes hapas. That's it seems that they did dip it in charoises. Rabbeinu Menoach pushes us away and says that you don't have to dip in charoises. Should be a matzah. There's no errors. The reason we dip mora is because there's a poison in the mora, which by dipping in the charoises we don't have to worry about it. And therefore, the reasoning of having to dip it because you eat it with something is stronger than the idea that you're getting rid of the poison or in the food. And when they ask a question, when you put the matzah in the charoises, you'll taste the charoises, not the taste of matzah. So the Rae Gann says you shouldn't leave the matzah very long in the charoises. It's just, and then if there's no time in the matzah, it'll be similar to putting it into mustard, where you get the time of mustard. And then the reasoning that matzah is zechel acheres and charois is zechel shibud. How can you mix one with the other? Rae says that Hillel, for sure, when he put matzah and morim together, so he had to dip it, and he even mixed matzah, which is cheres, and mora, which is shibud. So you see, he wasn't worried about that. The Chassam Sofer explains that the Rambam is of the opinion that matzah is zechel shibud. He writes, that it's the bread of affliction, and therefore, as some people translate it, that also makes sense that he dips in the charoises, that it was also a commemoration of the affliction. Ein lahashis zamora b'choises. You shouldn't leave. He goes further. B'choises mevor halachilas mora. Metav mora b'choises v'oichel. And the mora you dip in the charoises just as we do. But you shouldn't leave it there. You knock it off. Shemi vatal tamar, because otherwise you won't have the taste of the mora. The Gemara 115b says you shouldn't leave it in the mora, in the charoises, because maybe he'll take away the taste of the mora. And mitzvah midivrei seifrim, and the mitzvah of tivul charoises is a rabbinical decree, as we explain in Perek 7. You turn the page when you go to Koirach. After you eat the matzah by itself, you go ahead and choiz of a koirach matzah more. You put the matzah more together, metav b'charoises. You dip that in charoises. V'oichlan b'loi brocha. You eat it with a brocha, because you made a brocha on the matzah and on the more. And you say, why do you eat it? Because zeichal hamikdash. Rambam doesn't say that you say so, but before we eat it, we say zeichal hamikdash kehilul. Tibul koirach b'charoises. The Agos Maimonides writes that the Maram used to dip the mixture of matzah and mora, which is called koirach, in the charoises, and that's where Rabbeinu Tam says koirach is zeichel hamikdash kehilul, and there you had to dip something into the charoises. What did Hillel dip in the charoises if he ate matzah and mora together? So obviously he dipped the koirach. But those who feel that the tibul is to get rid of the eris, the poison that's in the charoises, because it says in Yerushalmi, we don't have it, that everything that's eaten with the pas doesn't have a problem of a poison. In other words, since you're mixing the mora with the matzah, you don't have to dip it to get rid of any. The bread will take care of it. They said, Amar Apava, we see from this, Hai Chasad Zorah L'Shkui B'Charoiz B'Shum Kafra. And the Rashbam explains kafir is a type of poison. The Chazeres is that type of poison, like in onions, and therefore you dip it in charoises to nullify that. Like Agos Maimonides says, there's another reason to dip in the charoises, because of the tit. As the Rambam writes, now Yosef Toiv writes that you shouldn't dip the koirach in charoises, and that's the Raser Aviyah and the other Goyni Ashkenaz. But Rabbeinu Manoach is of the opinion that you have to dip in the charoises because it's zeichel hamikdash kehilul, and Hillel had to dip it because otherwise he didn't have that second dipping. What it says in Sidurim, that koirach hu b'loi tibul, it's a mistake, because you have to say, and he adds, you don't make a brocha on koirach because it's only a zecher, it's not the halacha. The Machaber writes in Siman Tov Ayin Hey, you should break from the shleima and from the prusa a little bit, and you should dip it in salt, although we didn't dip in salt. Usually you dip in salt the bread when you eat it. By the Seder we don't necessarily. The Ramah brings that the minig is not to dip in salt on the night of the first night, and that's the minig of the Ramah, because at Pas Noki it doesn't need melach. So Mishnah Berurah explains, the other nights of Pesach you have to dip the matzah in melach, even though it's Pas Nakiya. But B'leil Pesach you don't do it so because it's more important to eat. It's considered, first of all, more of a poor man's food when you don't have salt on it, and also you don't have to do it on the Leil Pesach. The Mechaber continues, and then you should take a Kazayas more and you should dip it totally into Chorosis. Totally. Pasha deeply into Chorosis, but you don't leave it on the Mora, so it shouldn't nullify the taste of the Mora. And therefore you have to push it through, to shake off the Chorosis from on it. And you should make a brocha al achilas Mora. You should eat it not by Seba. Everything else is eaten reclined, but not Mora. And then you eat the matzah, and you make take off a piece from it, and he puts it together with a mora, and you dip in the charosis. So the Rambam says that those who say that one should not dip, dip, should not dip with a mora. What's he saying here? Okay, nice.